My husband shared intimate photos of me with his friends to win a bet and still slept beside me every night like nothing happened. When I begged him to tell me the truth, he grabbed my hand, eyes wide, and said, "I thought if I proposed, it would cancel it out." I didn't say a word. That was 7 months ago. Last night, he locked himself in his apartment bathroom and cried so quietly I almost missed it. My husband fake dated me to win a bet and share my photos with his boys, so I got them all convicted. I was 18 when my stepbrother Jake first brought his college friends around. I had a full scholarship to med school and he couldn't stand it. Everything about me set him off. How I corrected his friends, ignored their crude jokes, walked past them like they didn't exist. Jake would watch me with this cold smile while telling his friends I needed to be taught humility, that I thought I was too good for everyone. I thought he was just being a bitter jerk, but I had no idea he was recruiting them for something that would destroy my entire life. The bet started at a Super Bowl party 6 years ago. Jake gathered his 5 closest friends in our basement, hammered on expensive whiskey and their own egos. "Here's the game," he announced. "First one to make her fall in love, then dump her publicly. Extra points if you get photos. And boys, you know the rule. Any trophies get shared with the group. I need proof you're making progress." They put money in a pot, $500 to destroy me. My husband won, not because he was the smoothest or most handsome, but because he was patient. He studied me for weeks before making his move, learning that I volunteered at the animal shelter on Saturdays, and then showing up with donations. He memorized my coffee order and accidentally bumped into me at the campus cafe, always with perfect timing and that shy smile I fell for completely. Every sweet gesture and thoughtful text, every romantic surprise that made me believe I'd found someone special, was carefully calculated. I later learned he kept a notebook where he documented what made me smile, what made me trust him, what made me lower my guard enough to let him in. 6 months in, he was supposed to execute the plan, post our intimate photos in their group chat, humiliate me at my graduation party, then collect his winnings. Instead, he proposed. Years later, during one of his crying fits in our kitchen, he'd say things like, "I never deserved you," and "I'm not the man you think I am." But he never told me why he felt so guilty. He never warned me that my stepbrother had orchestrated our entire relationship, never admitted that those early intimate moments weren't just between us. I found out at a dinner party meant to celebrate our pregnancy announcement. My husband's friend Derek, hammered on wine and nostalgia, started laughing about the old days, how they all thought my husband was crazy for marrying his assignment, how Jake still had screenshots from their group chat, demanding updates and proof of progress. My stepbrother went pale. My husband grabbed Derek's arm, but Derek kept talking, oblivious. Remember Jake's trophy rule? Any pics had to go through him first. Quality control, he called it. The room tilted as I stood up slowly, my hand protective over my belly while my voice came out strange and distant. "What pictures?" Jake wouldn't meet my eyes and my husband reached for me, but I backed away from his touch like it burned. "What pictures?" The words ripped from my throat as the silence stretched endlessly, everyone frozen in their seats until Derek finally understood what he'd done. His face went white as he whispered, "Oh shoot, you didn't know." I left that night with nothing but my purse and my rage. The next morning, I called every woman these men had dated in college and started a group chat where we compared notes. That's how I found Sarah, who dated Jake's friend Marcus and had recordings of him bragging about their teaching moments. She'd suspected something was wrong and caught him on tape describing the trophy system in detail, how Jake kept a folder on his laptop where he'd rate their submissions like some sick game show judge. We went to the police together with 5 women's worth of evidence showing revenge porn, conspiracy, and systematic targeting. Jake tried to intimidate me by showing up at my work and doctor's appointments, telling me I was overreacting and that it was just boys being boys. "You should thank me because look how well you turned out," he said with that same cold smile from years ago. My parents took his side, calling me dramatic and ungrateful for destroying the family over what they called harmless fun. They cut me off when I refused to drop the charges. The investigation uncovered everything as Jake's laptop revealed hundreds of photos from dozens of women spanning 10 years. Jake got 3 years while the others got probation, and my ex-husband gave me everything in the divorce after testifying against them. I thought it was finally over. That's when the prosecutor called asking me to come down immediately. "We need you to look at something," she said, her voice strained. Forensics found another hidden folder on Jake's laptop with your name on it. When I arrived, she slid a stack of printed photos across the table. My hands shook as I flipped through them. Pictures of me sleeping in my childhood bedroom from when I was 15, me at the grocery store in high school, getting coffee during college orientation, through windows of my friend Sarah's apartment where I'd crash after late study sessions, places my husband had never even been. "These go back years before the bet," I whispered, my voice cracking, "before I even met any of them." The prosecutor leaned forward. "There's more. The metadata shows these were being uploaded from multiple devices. Someone else has been..." The prosecutor's words hung in the air like a physical presence. Multiple devices. Someone else. My mind raced through possibilities while my body stayed frozen in the chair. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the evidence spread before me. The prosecutor cleared her throat and pulled out another folder. Inside were printouts of metadata analysis, timestamps, and device IDs that meant nothing to me but clearly meant something to her. She pointed to specific entries, explaining how the upload pattern suggested at least one other person had been documenting my life alongside Jake. I forced myself to examine each photo more carefully. The angles were wrong. Jake couldn't have taken these. He'd been at football practice when some were shot, at family vacations when others were captured. My stomach churned as I recognized locations I'd thought were safe spaces. The library where I studied late, the parking lot of my part-time job, even through my dorm window during freshman year. The prosecutor excused herself to make a call, leaving me alone with the evidence of a violation that stretched back further than I'd imagined. I pulled out my phone and started texting my mother about old family friends who might have had access to our house, anyone who could have taken these photos. My fingers trembled as I typed. Movement in the parking garage caught my eye through the window. Jake's car sat 3 spaces from mine, engine running. He'd been here before me, waiting. Of course he had. He always knew where to find me. The prosecutor returned with 2 officers who nodded politely but said nothing. I gathered my things, knowing I'd have to walk past Jake's car to reach mine. The officers offered to escort me, but I declined. I needed to show him I wasn't afraid, even though fear crawled up my spine like ice. Jake stepped out of his car as I approached mine. The officers tensed behind me, but he kept his distance, hands visible. His breathing quickened when I mentioned finding photos taken from outside my bedroom window. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally spoke in that dismissive tone I knew too well. "You're paranoid. Always were," he said, as the 2 officers walked past us, their presence the only thing keeping him from coming closer. "First you destroy my life over some stupid college prank, now you're inventing stalkers? Maybe you should talk to someone about these conspiracy theories." My phone buzzed. Mom needed someone to pick up her heart medication from the pharmacy. The timing couldn't be worse. She was staying with Jake's father while her house was being fumigated. I'd have to choose between confronting the past and helping my mother. Jake smirked, knowing exactly what that text meant. I got in my car without responding to him, but I could feel his eyes tracking my movements. The pharmacy was 20 minutes away, and I knew Jake would use my absence to establish his narrative. He'd play the wrongfully accused victim, twist the story until even the officers started doubting me. Sure enough, I spotted Jake's car following 3 cars behind as I merged onto the highway. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I took the exit for the pharmacy, watching him continue past. He'd circle back, I knew. He always did. The pharmacy was crowded with elderly customers picking up their prescriptions. I took a number and sat down, trying to calm my racing thoughts. An older woman struggled with her walker near the consultation window, and I stood to help her. She smiled gratefully, then mentioned how nice that young man Jake had been lately at the community center, helping with their technology classes. My phone exploded with notifications. 3 texts arrived simultaneously. My lawyer needed me at an emergency custody hearing tomorrow regarding my divorce settlement. My boss demanded I cover mandatory overtime for a sick colleague, and Jake's lawyer had sent a cease and desist letter warning me against harassment and defamation. I stared at the competing crises, knowing I couldn't handle all 3. The custody hearing was non-negotiable, but missing work would mean disciplinary action. I made the only choice I could, calling my boss to say I was sick. Her sigh of disappointment echoed through the phone, and I realized too late how this would look. Jake's lawyer would paint it as evidence of my unstable and obsessed behavior, unable to maintain employment while pursuing my vendetta. My phone buzzed again. Jake had posted on Facebook about visiting the children's cancer ward where I'd volunteered in high school, making a donation in honor of his beloved stepsister, who taught him the importance of giving back. The post already had 47 sympathetic comments in 10 minutes. Jake's running a masterclass in being the worst person ever, stalking photos from when she was 15, then showing up at the cancer ward for sympathy points. That's some next-level villain behavior right there. Former classmates, family friends, even some of my old teachers praising his grace under pressure. The pharmacist called my number, and I paid for Mom's medication, my mind still reeling from Jake's calculated PR campaign. As I walked to my car, my phone rang. My 8-year-old niece's voice came through, small and confused. "Aunt, Mommy says we can't see you anymore, but I don't understand. Uncle Jake bought me a bike last week, and he said you were just going through a hard time. Are you sick again?" The words hit like physical blows. Sick again. Jake had been planting seeds, using the language of my college anxiety diagnosis to paint me as unstable. I tried to explain gently, but how do you tell a child that her favorite uncle is dangerous? She defended him, listing all the nice things he'd done recently. The bike, the ice cream trips, the promise to take her to Disney World. After I hung up, I sat in the pharmacy parking lot, considering my options. My father's old friend Nathan still lived on our childhood street. He'd installed security cameras years ago that faced the road. If anyone had footage from 2015, it would be him. But asking would mean explaining why I needed it, admitting that the stalking went back years before anyone knew. I drove past my old house slowly, seeing Nathan's cameras still mounted on his garage. The angle would have captured anyone approaching our property. Evidence might exist, but accessing it would require uncomfortable truths I wasn't ready to share. My phone buzzed with a notification from the Neighborhood Watch Facebook page. Someone had posted a photo of me sitting in my car outside the abandoned corner store where Dad used to take me for ice cream. Concerning behavior, the caption read, "This woman has been sitting here for 20 minutes. Should we call someone?" I hadn't realized I'd stopped there. The habit was so ingrained. Dad and I used to come here every Sunday after church. Now it looked like I was stalking an empty building. More ammunition for Jake's narrative. The comments were already piling up. Neighbors I'd known for years discussing whether I seemed dangerous. Someone mentioned seeing me at the prosecutor's office. Another noted Jake's recent Facebook post about forgiveness and moving forward. The contrast was clear. He was the charitable, forward-thinking victim while I was the unstable woman lurking around abandoned buildings. I drove home, knowing the battle was shifting. Jake had moved beyond defense into offense, crafting a public narrative that would make my evidence seem like the ravings of a jealous, mentally unstable woman. Every move I made to uncover the truth would be twisted into proof of my obsession. The emergency custody hearing loomed tomorrow. My ex-husband might use my erratic behavior to challenge the divorce settlement. My boss would document my sick day, especially after I'd seemed fine yesterday. Jake's cease and desist letter would make me look like the aggressor if I continued investigating. But those photos haunted me. Someone had been watching me since I was 15. Someone who knew my routines, my safe spaces, my vulnerabilities. Jake might have orchestrated the bet, but he hadn't been alone in his obsession. The thought made my skin crawl. I pulled into my driveway to find a familiar car waiting. My former pediatrician, Dr. Catherine, now retired, tired, stood by my front door with a plate of cookies and a concerned expression. She'd heard about the family drama and wanted to check on me. I invited her in, grateful for a friendly face. Over tea, she mentioned that Jake had called her office asking about my medical records. He'd claimed it was for the custody evaluation, said he was concerned about my mental health history, affecting my ability to make sound decisions. She'd refused, of course, but warned me that he seemed determined to build a case about my stability. After she left, I sat with my laptop, going through old family photos. Every gathering, every birthday, every holiday, looking for faces that didn't belong, angles that seemed wrong. The paranoia Jake accused me of was becoming real, but how could it not? Someone had been documenting my life for over a decade. My phone rang. Mom's voice was strained, careful. Honey, you're acting just like when your dad left. Remember how you pulled away from everyone then? History is repeating itself, and I'm worried about you. The comparison stung because it held a grain of truth. When dad left, I had isolated myself, convinced everyone was choosing sides. But this was different. This was real. The photos proved it. Yet even as I tried to explain, I heard how I sounded. Desperate, paranoid. Exactly how Jake wanted me to sound. History repeating, the phrase echoed after I hung up. Jake would use that. It would become his new catchphrase, a shorthand for my supposed instability. I could already see him deploying it in conversations, painting himself as the concerned stepbrother watching history repeat itself. My laptop dinged with a notification. The family group chat was exploding. Someone had shared the neighborhood watch photo of me outside the abandoned store. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone had an opinion. Their responses revealed their allegiances clearer than any direct question could have. She needs help, wrote Aunt Catherine. This is what happens when you pursue vengeance instead of forgiveness, added Uncle John. Maybe we should stage an intervention, suggested a cousin. Only my sister Jen remained silent, but her absence spoke volumes. She'd been my closest ally until Jake offered to help pay for her IVF treatments. Now she couldn't afford to take sides. Another text, this time from my best friend since middle school. She was gentle but direct. My daily texts updating her about Jake were starting to concern her husband. He didn't want drama around their kids. Could I maybe ease up on the Jake talk when I came over? The isolation was systematic, surgical. Jake knew exactly which pressure points to push, which relationships to leverage. I was being carved away from my support system one person at a time. I opened my laptop to check my cloud storage, wanting to review my therapy notes from the years before all this started. Maybe there were clues I'd missed, signs of the stalking I'd attributed to coincidence. But as the files loaded, I noticed the last access time. Yesterday at 3 p.m., when I'd been at the prosecutor's office. My blood ran cold. The cloud storage was part of our family plan. Jake had admin access. My therapy notes were all there, exposed, session after session, documenting my anxiety, my trust issues, my fears about relationships. Jake had been reading my most private thoughts, learning exactly how to weaponize them. I scrolled through frantically, seeing his digital fingerprints on files dating back months. He'd been preparing for this moment long before Derek's drunken revelation. The next morning arrived too quickly. I dressed carefully for the custody hearing, choosing conservative clothes that screamed stability. My hands shook as I applied makeup to cover the dark circles under my eyes. The courthouse parking lot was already filling when I arrived, and I recognized several cars. Jake's, of course, my ex-husband's, even my mother's old sedan. Inside the courtroom, Jake sat with his lawyer, looking every inch the concerned family man. He'd worn his father's suit. I recognized the cut. When he caught my eye, he mouthed something that looked like sympathy. The performance had already begun. My ex-husband's lawyer argued that recent events showed I was spiraling, that the stress of the pregnancy combined with my obsession with Jake made me an unsuitable candidate for the generous settlement we'd agreed upon. They presented evidence, my missed workday, the neighborhood watch photo, even screenshots of my erratic social media activity. During a recess, Jake approached me in the hallway. His lawyer tried to stop him, but he waved her off. He stood just close enough to seem non-threatening to observers, but I could smell his cologne, the same brand my father used to wear. He'd started using it recently, another calculated move. He spoke quietly about how this could all go away if I'd just let the past be the past, how the family needed healing, not more division, how my father would have wanted us to find peace. Every word was perfectly chosen for the security cameras recording the hallway, painting him as the peacemaker. I left the courthouse with my settlement intact, but my reputation further damaged. The judge had expressed concerns about my mental state and suggested I seek counseling. Jake's narrative was becoming legal record. That afternoon, I discovered Jake had started dating my grief counselor's receptionist. She was young, eager to please, and had access to appointment schedules. She probably didn't even realize she was being used. When I called to confirm my next session, she cheerfully mentioned that Jake had been asking about me, worried about my well-being. She even quoted my favorite poem, the one I'd shared in group therapy, as if it were a casual coincidence. The manipulation was elegant in its cruelty. Every safe space I'd built was being infiltrated. Every source of support was being turned or taken away. I started keeping a journal by hand, afraid to put anything digital where Jake might access it. 3 days later, the prosecutor called with updates. They'd found more photos on different devices, but the trail was complicated. Some were from IP addresses linked to public Wi-Fi at places I'd frequented, the campus library, the coffee shop where I studied. Someone had been following me for years, uploading photos from locations that would be nearly impossible to trace. Old emails started surfacing in the family group chat, messages from my college years where I'd joked about violence during finals week. I could unalive Jake for playing music this loud during my study time. If he eats my labeled food one more time, I'm going to unalive him. Normal sibling frustrations expressed in hyperbolic terms, now screenshot and shared as evidence of my long-standing violent ideation. The prosecutor asked uncomfortable questions about these emails. How did Jake know exactly which people to target and when? The timing with the grief counselor's receptionist test is so precise. Did he plan this months ago, or is he just really good at spotting opportunities to isolate someone? About my history of threatening Jake. About whether I'd ever acted on these fantasies. I tried to explain context, but context doesn't screenshot well. It doesn't forward easily in group chats. It doesn't stand up against a carefully crafted narrative of instability. My nephew started repeating things after his weekend visits with Jake. "Aunt's sick again," he'd say matter-of-factly. "Uncle Jake said she takes special medicine, but sometimes forgets." The words were innocent from a child's mouth, but devastating in their implications. Jake was planting seeds in the next generation, ensuring his version of events would persist, even if the truth came out. Then came an unexpected break. My neighbor had installed a new security system last month, one that captured the street in high definition. The footage showed Jake's car parked outside my house at times he'd claimed to be elsewhere. Small lies, but documented ones. Finally, something concrete. But when I tried to use this evidence, I discovered Jake had anticipated this too. He'd been visiting my elderly neighbor, helping with yard work, bringing groceries, the same neighbor whose footage I needed. When I asked to review the recordings, the neighbor hesitated. Jake had warned them I might come asking, had painted me as unstable and potentially dangerous. They agreed to let me see the footage, but called Jake immediately after I left. Family court interpreted my evidence gathering differently than I'd intended. The judge saw it as an attempt to alienate Jake from his father's grandchildren, to poison family relationships out of spite. My careful documentation looked like obsession. My search for truth looked like harassment. I remembered my father's old passwords and used them to access his cloud storage before Jake could claim the account. His last search history broke my heart. How to protect daughter from stalker. Legal options for harassment. Security systems for adult children. He'd known. He'd been trying to protect me, but died before he could act. Jake's social media presence grew more sophisticated. He posted photos from my workplace during lunch hours, always when I was in meetings or away from my desk. Supporting local businesses. The captions read, "Great coffee at my stepsister's favorite spot." Colleagues started mentioning his visits, how nice he was, how concerned he seemed about me. The therapy sessions I was court-ordered to attend became another battlefield. My therapist had to testify about our discussions, including sessions from years before where I'd expressed revenge fantasies after bad breakups or work conflicts. Normal venting transformed into evidence of violent tendencies. Technology kept betraying me. My phone's recording app glitched during a conversation where Jake had started to admit things. The file corrupted, leaving me with nothing but my word against his. He'd noticed the recording notification, had smirked at my phone. Later, I learned certain apps could cause interference with recording software. Jake had done his research. My work suffered as the stress mounted. Calls during business hours from lawyers, investigators, family members, emergency custody hearings that couldn't be rescheduled. My boss's patience wore thin. When I needed to leave early for a court appearance, she suggested I might want to consider whether I could fulfill my job requirements given my personal situation. The daycare situation became a weapon. Jake was listed as an emergency contact, a decision made years ago when family was still family. When I got stuck in traffic during a police interview, the daycare had to call him. He picked up my friend's child with perfect grace, even bought them ice cream. Another public display of his reliability versus my chaos. The corner store owner who'd known my father for decades faced his own crisis. His business permit was anonymously challenged, citing minor violations that had been overlooked for years. The timing was suspicious, but proving connection was impossible. When I asked if he'd testify about seeing Jake near my childhood home, he apologetically declined. He couldn't fight City Hall at his age, he said. He had his own family to think about. The violation deepened when I found Jake in my childhood room during a family visit. He was wearing my father's watch, sleeping in my old bed. The sheets smelled like my mother's lavender detergent. He'd made himself at home in my absence, claiming he was helping with house maintenance. My mother defended him, saying he'd been so helpful since I'd become difficult. Jake made an offer through his lawyer. He'd confess to the bet, take responsibility for that humiliation, if I dropped the investigation into the earlier photos. He'd admit to being a stupid college kid, accept whatever consequences came from that admission. But the stalking allegations, the years of surveillance, those would have to stop. The choice felt impossible. Accept partial justice and let him control the narrative, or continue fighting and risk losing everything. When I refused, his lawyer framed it perfectly. I didn't want closure or healing. I wanted revenge. The custody report reflected this interpretation. Security footage from Nathan's house revealed a horrible truth. The angle I remembered was wrong. The window in my memory wasn't the window in the footage. I'd been right about being watched, but wrong about the details. Truth became harder to prove when mixed with imperfect memory. My father's journal surfaced in a box of his things my mother had been sorting. His handwriting, shaky from illness, documented strange incidents. Cars parked too long outside the house, feeling followed during errands, seeing the same faces in unexpected places. He'd blamed it on paranoia from his medication, but the dates aligned with the metadata from the photos. The journal showed he'd been tracking patterns, not paranoid delusions. License plates noted, times recorded, incidents documented with the methodical precision of a man trying to prove he wasn't losing his mind. But he'd never told anyone, afraid of seeming unstable while fighting cancer. My aunt faced her own impossible choice. Supporting me meant risking her relationship with Jake's father, which meant losing access to her grandchildren. Jake's father had informal custody arrangements, and crossing him meant exile from family gatherings. She chose the grandchildren, but slipped me a flash drive at my father's grave. "He would have wanted you to have this," she whispered before walking away. The drive contained files my father had hidden, encrypted with passwords only I would know. More documentation, more evidence, more proof that this had been happening for years, but also letters he'd never sent, apologies for not protecting me better, for choosing family peace over my safety. Desperation drove me to create a fake dating profile, matching with Jake's friends to extract extract information. I flirted, suggested meetings, played the role of an interested woman. The conversations revealed nothing directly but showed patterns. How they talked about women, how they shared information, how they still operated like the college boys who'd made that bet. I orchestrated an accidental meeting with Jake's mother at the cemetery. She was visiting her mother's grave while I visited my father's. We talked about weather, loss, the weight of family secrets. I photographed headstones while she talked, documenting our conversation without her knowledge. Another violation of trust in service of truth. The Dropbox my father had maintained contained metadata that changed everything. The photos predated Jake's involvement by years. Some were from when he was too young to be responsible. The timeline suggested something generational, something that started before either of us understood what was happening. My mother's estranged brother emerged from whatever rock he'd been under, suddenly interested in my father's life insurance. He'd heard about the family drama, saw an opportunity. His presence added another layer of complexity, another person to manage while fighting the main battle. The investigation's cost mounted. Private investigators, lawyers, court fees, credit cards maxed out while Jake had access to family resources. I watched him use emergency funds meant for medical crises to pay his legal team, money my father had saved being spent to protect his killer's reputation. A public confrontation at my father's favorite diner went viral in our small town's Facebook group. I'd seen Jake there with my mother, sitting in our old booth, eating my father's usual order. The owner, who'd known my father for decades, asked me to leave when voices were raised. The comments online focused on my harassment of a grieving family. My pharmacy tech position evaporated after too many personal calls during work hours. The warning had been clear, but when the prosecutor needed immediate information, I'd had to take the call. My manager's disappointment was professional, not personal, but the result was the same: unemployment in the middle of a legal battle. I started sleeping in my car some nights, parked outside the prosecutor's office where I felt safe. Security guards got to know me, offering sad smiles and occasional coffee. Meanwhile, Jake renovated my childhood room, posting progress photos on Instagram. Healing spaces for a healing family. The captions read, "My mother's breakdown came at my father's favorite restaurant. She sobbed into her hands, begging me to let him rest in peace. This obsession was unaliving her too," she said. She'd lost her husband and now was losing her daughter to paranoia and vengeance. The other diners watched our family drama unfold over untouched plates. The investigation's collateral damage spread. The retirement home janitor who'd let me review visitor logs was suspended pending investigation. His granddaughter asked why Grandpa was crying, why he couldn't work anymore. Jude is corrupting files, jamming recordings, and somehow making evidence disappear faster than a magician with something to hide. His wife's Facebook posts blamed me for their financial crisis, called me selfish for pursuing conspiracy theories at the expense of good people. I kept investigating anyway. The truth mattered more than individual comfort, I told myself. But watching innocent people suffer for helping me revealed an uncomfortable truth about my own choices. I was becoming what Jake painted me as, someone who hurt others in pursuit of personal goals. My last ally asked the question I'd been avoiding. What if Jake was telling the truth about not taking those early photos? What if he'd found them, been disturbed by them, but wasn't responsible for creating them? My inability to answer immediately revealed the cracks in my certainty. To maintain credibility about the larger stalking issue, I publicly admitted to accessing Jake's accounts without permission. The admission was legally necessary but personally devastating. It gave his lawyers ammunition, supported their harassment claims, made me look like the unstable stalker they'd been describing. Then came the revelation that shattered my understanding of my father. The evidence showed he'd found photos years ago but never told me. He'd tried to handle it alone, protect the family from scandal. His silence, meant as protection, had enabled years of continued stalking. The man I'd idealized had chosen family reputation over my safety. Jake's legal team filed an emergency motion, advancing the trial date by 6 months. My lawyer was at his daughter's wedding, unable to respond immediately. The system moved forward without consideration for personal readiness. Justice operated on its own timeline. In quiet moments, I began to understand Jake differently. His crime was real, his violations undeniable, but mixed with the cruelty was genuine pain. He'd always been the outsider, the stepchild who didn't quite belong. His biological father had abandoned him. His stepfamily had tolerated him. He'd wanted to belong so desperately that he'd tried to control his way into permanent connection. The realization didn't excuse his actions but complicated them. He wasn't a simple villain, but a damaged person who'd chosen damaging solutions. His need for family had twisted into something possessive and harmful. Understanding this made fighting him harder, not easier. Using my father's memory as a weapon violated everything he'd stood for. He'd wanted family unity above all else, had sacrificed truth for peace, but I had to break that promise. Had to use his documentation against the family he'd tried to protect. Each piece of evidence felt like a betrayal of his dying wishes. The woman seeking justice had to become someone her father wouldn't recognize. Strategic, manipulative, willing to hurt others for larger goals. I used Jake's mother's grief to extract information, pretended sympathy while gathering passwords. The tactics felt wrong but necessary. Small legal victories felt hollow when contrasted with personal losses. Winning emotion while losing family relationships. Gaining evidence while sacrificing moral high ground. Each step forward in court meant 2 steps backward in life. Jake's counterclaim gained credibility with each documented incident. My evidence gathering looked like stalking. My investigation looked like harassment. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred in legal documents that reduced complex truth to simple categories. Everything hinged on the janitor's testimony about visitor logs. Would he risk more to tell the truth? Could his testimony withstand cross-examination? The case's outcome rested on an elderly man's willingness to choose truth over comfort. My childhood kindness to Jake's mother became leverage in unexpected ways. She remembered me teaching him to tie his shoes, helping with homework, being the big sister he desperately wanted to impress. Those memories created cognitive dissonance with Jake's current narrative of me as unstable and dangerous. Professional relationships fractured along economic lines. Those who needed Jake's father's construction contract sided with the family. Those who could afford independence offered quiet support. The community divided based on financial dependencies I'd never noticed before. The legal system's limitations became clear as the case progressed. Historical stalking without immediate threat didn't meet requirements for restraining orders. Years of surveillance meant nothing without proof of current danger. The law protected against future harm, not past violations. I called in my father's favor with his military buddy Nathan, who worked in private security. He'd helped my father install those cameras years ago, had kept copies of old footage, but fear made him hesitant. He provided partial evidence with warnings about his own vulnerability. Even favors had limits when legal consequences loomed. Nathan's partial footage revealed something that made my blood freeze. The timestamps showed someone accessing my childhood home during hours when Jake had solid alibis. School events, family trips, documented appointments. The realization hit like a physical blow. Jake hadn't been working alone from the beginning. The prosecutor arranged another meeting, this time with federal investigators present. They'd trace the metadata further, uncovering a pattern that stretched back to my early teens. The IP addresses led to public libraries, internet cafes, places that existed before widespread security cameras. Someone had been methodical, careful, patient. I drove to my father's safety deposit box with shaking hands. The key had been in his journal, taped to a page dated 3 months before his death. Inside, I found USB drives, printed emails, and a letter in his handwriting. The letter explained everything: how he'd discovered Jake's biological father had been obsessed with my mother before she remarried, how the man had transferred that obsession to me after I was born. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos of my mother from the 1990s, taken from distances that suggested surveillance. Then photos of me as a baby, a toddler, a child. The biological father had died when Jake was 16, but by then Jake had already found his father's collection. Instead of destroying it, he'd continued the work. Jake's therapy records got subpoenaed after his therapist reported concerning statements. The transcripts revealed his twisted logic. He believed watching me was protecting me, keeping me safe the way his father had tried to protect my mother. When the bet came along, it wasn't about humiliation. It was about control, about keeping me close where he could monitor me better. The courtroom filled with family members choosing sides. My mother sat behind me, finally understanding the weight of what she'd dismissed. Jake's mother sat across the aisle, torn between supporting her son and protecting future victims. The empty chair where my father would have sat felt like a presence itself. Evidence presentation took 3 days. The prosecutor laid out the timeline methodically. The biological father's original obsession, his death, Jake's discovery of the materials, his decision to continue surveillance. The bet wasn't the beginning, but an evolution of existing behavior. My ex-husband testified about Jake's insistence on regular updates, his demands for photos, his rage when my husband proposed instead of following through. Jake's breakdown came during cross-examination. His hands shook as he admitted finding his father's collection, feeling compelled to continue because stopping felt like abandoning his father's memory. He talked about watching me succeed, go to college, build a life, things his father never got to see my mother do. The obsession had transferred completely, mixing genuine care with possessive surveillance. His mother took the stand against her lawyer's advice. She corroborated the timeline, admitting she'd found strange photos in her late husband's belongings, but hadn't understood their significance. She'd noticed Jake's behavior changes after his father's death, but attributed it to grief. Her testimony cracked the family's united front. The judge ordered psychiatric evaluation for Jake and immediate protective orders. The criminal charges expanded beyond the original bet to include years of stalking, harassment, and privacy violations. Jake's friends faced additional charges as the investigation revealed they'd known about the extended surveillance and participated in gathering information. Nathan finally provided complete footage from his security system, revealing Jake's biological father had installed hidden cameras around our property before his death. Jake had maintained them, replacing batteries, downloading footage. The technical evidence showed a sophisticated operation spanning 2 decades. Community members who dismissed my concerns faced their own reckoning. The elderly woman from the pharmacy admitted Jake had asked strange questions about my routines. The corner store owner acknowledged seeing Jake's biological father lurking years ago, but hadn't wanted to get involved. The collective silence had enabled 2 generations of stalking. Jake's sentencing hearing brought unexpected revelations. A woman from another state contacted prosecutors. Jake's biological father had stalked her in college before meeting Jake's mother. The pattern went back further than anyone imagined. She'd kept evidence for 30 years, afraid to come forward until now. I provided my victim impact statement without vindication. The generational trauma was real, the pain authentic on all sides. I requested maximum supervision and mandatory treatment rather than just imprisonment. Jake needed help breaking the cycle, not just punishment. The judge agreed, sentencing him to 5 years with intensive psychiatric treatment. The financial settlement included damages from Jake's father's estate. The construction company faced civil suits from other victims who came forward. My mother and I used the money to establish a foundation for stalking victims, focusing on early intervention and family education. Rebuilding happened slowly. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged. Family members who'd chosen sides too firmly, friends who'd believed Jake's narrative too completely. But others surprised me. My sister apologized, admitting she'd suspected something but hadn't wanted to lose the IVF funding. We started therapy together. My mother moved to a smaller house, unable to stay where so many violations had occurred. We went through my father's belongings together, finding more evidence of his attempts to protect us. He'd installed security systems, changed locks repeatedly, even considered moving but worried it would escalate things. His silence had been misguided protection. The prosecutor's office offered me a victim advocate position. My experience navigating the system while being gaslit and isolated made me effective at helping others. The pharmacy tech job was gone, but this new role felt like purpose born from pain. Jake's letters from prison arrived monthly. I didn't read them initially, but my therapist suggested confronting the communication might help. They revealed a broken man grappling with inherited obsession, trying to understand how love had twisted into possession. I never responded but kept them as reminders of how pain perpetuates through generations. My ex-husband remarried 2 years later. We maintained cordial contact through lawyers, both understanding our entire relationship had been built on manipulation. He sent a final letter apologizing for his role, acknowledging that even his genuine feelings had been tainted by the original deception. The anniversary of my father's death brought unexpected peace. Standing at his grave with my mother, I finally understood his impossible position. He'd discovered a threat that predated his involvement, tried to protect us while maintaining family stability. His methods were flawed, but his love was real. The restraining orders became permanent, with digital monitoring to prevent cyberstalking. Jake would serve his time, get treatment, and hopefully break the cycle. But I'd never fully trust that the watching had stopped. Some violations run too deep for complete healing. I kept the foundation small and local, focusing on education about generational trauma and stalking patterns. No media tours or book deals, just quiet work helping families recognize dangerous patterns before they escalated. My story wasn't unique, just documented. 3 years later, I placed flowers on 3 graves: my father's, his military buddy Nathan, who'd passed suddenly, and eventually Jake's biological father's unmarked plot. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement of how pain travels through bloodlines until someone chooses to stop it. The family reformed around truth rather than silence. Those who stayed built new traditions, honest ones. We spoke about uncomfortable truths at gatherings, checked in about boundaries, watched for patterns. The next generation would know their history, all of it. Jake completed treatment and moved across the country upon release. The restraining orders held, the monitoring continued, but reports suggested he was building a quiet life. He worked at a hardware store, attended therapy, avoided social media. Sometimes breaking cycles means accepting distance. My mother learned to live with her role in enabling through ignorance. She'd chosen not to see what was happening, prioritized family peace over daughter's safety. Our relationship rebuilt slowly, honestly, without pretending the past hadn't happened. I returned to school eventually, finishing my medical degree with a focus on psychiatric treatment for stalking behaviors. The scholarship had waited, my spot held by administrators who'd followed the case. Education felt like reclaiming something stolen. The empty corner store where I'd been photographed became a community center. The owner's grandson bought it and turned it into a safe space for victims of domestic violence and stalking. My father's favorite booth at the diner now bore a small plaque about recognizing warning signs of surveillance. Some nights I still checked locks twice, still startled at unexpected photos being taken. The hypervigilance would never fully fade, but I'd learned to live with it, to build a life despite it. Survival sometimes means accepting that safety is relative, not absolute. The last photo in evidence had been of me sleeping in my childhood room at 15. Now at 30, I owned my own home with security I controlled. The windows had privacy film, the cameras pointed outward, the locks were smart enabled. I'd never be that vulnerable teenager again. My mother and I developed a tradition of visiting my father's grave together on the anniversary of everything coming to light. We'd bring his favorite flowers and tell him about the foundation's work. The families helped, the patterns interrupted. His death hadn't been meaningless if it led to others being protected. The investigation had revealed over 200 photos spanning 20 years, 2 generations of watchers, dozens of complicit bystanders, 1 family destroyed and rebuilt. Justice came in increments, some legal, some personal, some found in simply surviving to tell the truth. I kept 1 photo from evidence, not of me, but of Jake and his biological father at a baseball game when Jake was 12. Both were looking at the camera, but Jake's eyes were turned slightly, watching something off frame. Even then, the pattern was visible to those who knew to look. The story ended not with resolution, but with management. Some wounds don't heal, they scar. Some truths don't liberate, they burden. But bearing witness matters. Breaking cycles matters. Choosing to stop generational pain matters, even when the cost is everything you thought family meant. Thanks for reading this story with me. It really made me think about how families pass down both good and bad patterns.